So I guess the best way to start is I got into hypnosis when I was 8 years old. My mom got a PhD in hypnotherapy, and I was just like kind of like paying attention to her, thinking this is the coolest thing in the world because I knew nothing about it. So I'm like, mommy knows how to control people's minds, kind of thing. So I'm like, cool, let me see what this is about. So I
Love
like
it.
picked up her books and I was like paging through them, and I'd ask her questions and I'd have her hypnotize me and I'd do all these things. And I really didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I was learning a lot of it. And then when I was about 11 years old or so, I went to youth camp with a friend. Like there was like you go away for a month in South Africa. That's where I grew up. You go away
Okay.
for a month and you just kind of like spend time. Like they teach you all skills, like Boy Scout kind of skills, whatever it is. And the one day we're bored, and my friend says, "Hey, why don't you hypnotize me?" I'm like, "That sounds like a great idea." So I hypnotize him, and he was just what in hypnosis you call a somnambulist. So he just went super deep, which very often happens with kids. And all of a sudden, I'm like hypnotizing him. I'm like, bark like a dog, quack like a duck. I made him scared of the ground, like all these crazy things. And everyone else in youth camp sees this and thinks it's the coolest thing in the world. So all of a sudden, I'm hypnotizing this person here, that person there, and just having fun with it all. And I just, by the time that the month was over, I had hypnotized God knows how many people and really enjoyed it. And so I just, and I mean, like, I was basically an 11 or 12-year-old on a freaking power trip thinking I just know how to do all these wonderful things to people. And so that power trip continued into high school where, like, now I'm like hypnotizing all my friends and I'm the authority that knows how to help people with stuff. But all my mom's books, they're not really on stage hypnosis, they're hypnotherapy. So I'm like learning stuff like eliminating phobias, trauma release, and things like that. So, like, when I'm working with friends, every once in a while I do something like, let me get you over your fear of birds. And I loved it so much, and I saw how powerful it was. And I just always wanted to do the deeper stuff. But I never really thought much of it. It's just like it was something I enjoyed, and it was just a fun thing. I was a kid on a power trip. So I go off to college and study finance and study for 4 years, get a degree in finance, and realize that I hate everything to do with it, and that I'm actually meant to be a healer that talks to people, works with people. And so after working in a bank for, my dad and I had a bit of a debate about this. I said I lasted 3 weeks and 2 days. He said I lasted 2 weeks and 3 days. I did not last very long in the finance career, basically, and I just basically quit the bank and said I don't want to do this anymore. And I went off and got certified in hypnosis. And from that point forth, like I started working with people right away. And just because I grew up doing this, I had a bit more of a knack in terms of the hypnotic languaging, everything else. It's just the way I learned how to do things while learning my language. And so I got really, really good at it, got really, really proficient, and started getting amazing results with people.
I imagine that the landscape of the space has changed so much over the last, 10, 15 years also, or however long ago it was that, you were doing it as a kid and then your mother was doing it. And because as we all know, this thing is more and more prevalent now, and people are actually turning to these tools for, all trauma and all sorts of other things, bad habits, everything else. But it wasn't that long ago where if you told somebody you did that, they'd be like, "Oh, sure." Hypnosis. Actually, they need a better name for it probably than just hypnosis, because everybody thinks like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna, like you said, make somebody bark or like be afraid of the ground or
Exactly.
something like that." It's like, well, first of all, how long? What was your timeline there, and how do you feel the landscape has changed? Do you find that, like when you were leaving the financial industry, leaving the bank, was that like completely unheard of to go from that to hypnosis? Like, what's the reception all that been like?
Well, I can definitely tell you the reception from my family was not very enjoyable.
Sure.
You just got a 4-year degree to work for 3 weeks and leave it
Yeah.
completely. Like, that makes a lot of sense. But just as a whole, hypnosis, I never thought of it as a career because
Mm.
it's like you said, it's you either do stage hypnosis or you work with people to stop smoking, basically, is what it
Sure.
was. And for me, it was so much deeper than that because what you can do with hypnosis, when you can really get inside a person's brain and help them deal with traumas that they've been carrying around for their whole lives, or a phobia by just help them rewire something that they think about, changes everything. And so when I say hypnosis, like you said, it's either I get people saying like, "Oh my God, you're gonna make me quack like a duck," or I
Yeah.
get people saying, "Oh, cool, my sister used it to stop smoking."
Sure.
And so it's just not the stuff I do. It's I did that for a while, and I had a practice. I hung up my little shingle, and I had people come to me, and I was charging to get people to stop smoking and lose weight, things like that. And it was very successful. But my real passion came about, and how it evolved for me more so is I love dealing with the really deep stuff. Like, I like getting into a person's psyche and figuring out why it is that they have this issue. And it's almost always boils down to like some kind. So one story I'll give you, and I actually wrote about it, so I know I can use her name. The one time I had a woman come to me, and she was like between 350 and 450 pounds. I mean, extremely, extremely, extremely overweight. And she comes, she sits down in my chair, and we start talking. Sweetest woman in the world, and she just tells me her life story and everything else. And I ask her about the diet she's done, and as she's telling me about all the different stuff, she's like, "Oh yeah, I did Weight Watchers, but like that's not going to work for me because I'm fat." And I go, "Oh yeah," and then tell me about another one. She's like, "Well, I did quick weight loss, and I mean that worked for 8 weeks, and then I gained it all back. That's what fat people do." And every single time that she'd tell me something about herself, she'd finish it off by explaining to me that as a fat person, it wouldn't work for her. And so, from a point of view of a hypnotist, what you hear in that moment is that she's identifying as a fat person. And the moment that you identify as something, so if I say I am a smart person, then I assume myself to have a certain set of skills that a quote unquote dumb person would not. Or if I assume myself to be a skinny person, I assume myself to have a certain set of behaviors that a fat person would not. So for her, as a fat person, diets don't work for fat people. A diet will work for a period of time, but obviously if you are fat, you're going to fail at it eventually. So I, instead of sitting there and working with her on changing a habit of looking at the food on the plate or anything like that, what I said was I did hypnosis with her and I said, I want you to go back to the very first time you ever realized you were fat. When was the first time you took on that identity? And it almost always goes back to between the ages of like 2 and 7, somewhere in that range. And she goes back to being 4 years old. She's in her garden, out in the sun in her bathing suit, and they're playing around with like a hose pipe and everything else. And they're just she's with her neighbors, and they're just playing around the garden. And I'm like, okay, cool. So let's see where this goes. And I say, so what happens next? And she goes, well, my mom is sitting there next to my neighbor's mom, and they're sitting there talking. And I just hear out the corner of my ear my mom telling the neighbor's mom, oh, Nicole's going to grow up and be fat just like me. And the part that amazes me so much about that story is it wasn't like some kind of a crazy car accident or the death of a loved one or anything else. It's just a child believing their parent enough that when her mom said Nicole is going to grow up and be fat just like me, she didn't hear her mom making a comment. She heard her mom making a psychic prediction. And she just absolutely fell into that belief of, I'm going to grow up and be fat. From that point forth, her parents put her on diets, but in the back of her mind, she's got that thing of saying, oh, cool, this is what's going to happen, but I know I'm going to grow up and be fat. Mom already told me that. And a whole life was shifted due to one child hearing something and believing it to be true. And so many things can happen that way. I mean, I can tell you how many people I've dealt with that had diseases like cancer or something absolutely terrible. And like it boils down to the fact that they heard a comment like, you're never going to be the same again. And their brain assumed that that means I'm going to get sick. And unfortunately, very often it can boil down to certain traumas and things like that. Obviously, there's a lot of that in our society. But the thing that really amazed me so much is that we really are these beautiful, amazing human beings that have all these capabilities. And then one comment here, one experience there, and we start clouding over our real selves and start becoming these, for lack of better wording, broken individuals in our own minds. And we start acting through that brokenness. And it completely affects us.
Now, the woman that that you treated for that, did she actually recall that that particular incident, or was that only through the hypnosis she was able to remember?
So the thing is, you always remember all your memories. It's just the fact that it's with hypnosis, you can get rid of a lot of the chatter that's going on for you consciously that stops you from being able to really pay attention to stuff. So at some point in time, I hope I do it with you and you'll see for yourself. But basically what happens is like, I'll use myself as an example. Like when I often do this kind of regression work with myself, I tell myself I want to go back to a memory. And what will happen is somewhere in the back of my mind, I'll remember that I've always remembered that specific thing. I just never really attached to it. And so with hypnosis, you just get rid of that extra conversation above it that basically says, oh no, that doesn't matter, or no, that didn't happen, or that was just a dream. And you go back to memories and it can be as clear to you. I mean, I've taken people back to the day that they were born and they remember the doctor sticking their finger in their mouth and it being salty.
Really?
Like,
Jeez.
it's amazing how much like the unconscious mind stores everything like a video camera. And I mean, that's why police use it, for example, for forensic investigations, that a person can remember something like what an attacker looked like, the number on a license plate. It's pretty amazing stuff. And that's only talking about regression work. I mean, there's so many other things that you can do with it.
Let's say a traumatic experience, for example. What I know the brain has a tendency to block those things out. Is that fits somewhere along the survival mechanism? I imagine. Is there a particular
Exactly.
reason for that? Has that been studied, or like what are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I just see it as a safety mechanism, really. I mean, like, so if something really bad happens, like, I mean, it's the stupid example that just comes to my mind right now, and you may need to edit this out. I want to hear ahead of
That's
time.
fine.
But,
No
like, I mean,
worries.
like, the stupid example that comes to my mind is, like, I mean, if you cut yourself, I mean, the first thing you do is you just kind of, like, you just kind of, like, cover it, like, there's
Yeah.
something in your brain that just doesn't want to attach to that bad thing that happened to you.
Yeah.
And so, one example that comes to my mind is the one time I was working with a woman who definitely had traumatic childhood experiences. I mean, and you could tell that they were pretty severe for her. And I started doing hypnosis with her, and I told her, I want you to go back to how everything started. And we did all the right things to basically dissociate her away to make her feel comfortable. And she starts talking to me about alien abduction. And I'm like, okay, cool. Tell me about your alien abduction. And as she starts telling me about the alien abduction, she starts telling me about the experiments that they're performing on her and the different things that they're doing to her. And all I do is through hypnosis, I help her detach away from the fear and the pain that she experienced in the alien abduction. And I helped her feel safe and comfortable and realize the fact that that was then, this is now, she's stronger now, she's safer. And at the end of each session, I just told her, like, I mean, there's no need for you to have to really remember this now. We'll continue on it with it next session. And when a person really trusts you and their unconscious mind understands what you're doing, they'll accept that kind of suggestion and they will get kind of like a temporary amnesia. And it was after 3, 4 sessions, however long it was, I got to a point that, like, I mean, we really dealt with everything that was necessary with the alien abduction. And then, like, she just blurts out, she goes, "Oh yeah, I was also molested as a kid, but that's not a big deal." So what happened was the unconscious mind, in order to to protect her from the memory of the molestation, it created a metaphor. It created another thing for her to deal with that we could actually work with in order to do that. And so that's just one example of how the mind can do things to protect us in those kinds of situations. I don't really know if that answered your question completely, but
Yeah.
that is the mind is just it's freaking amazing at the way that it can completely just make the changes necessary in order to allow us to just continue on in this world.
Well, first of all, I'm fascinated by the whole alien abduction thing. Anyway, with the understanding that whether they're out there or not, I do know that most of those cases are probably similar to what you're describing. Somebody just trying
Yeah.
to subvert something terrible that happened and find their own way of coping with it, or at least being able to express it. So
And I
that's
can't say, as far
crazy.
as I know, she was abducted by aliens, right?
That
Like, I
could
mean, I
be.
can't say that.
Yeah,
But at the
yeah.
end of the day, I just wanted to clear out the trauma that was associated with it.
The formal training now, because obviously medical science changes all the time. As a matter of fact, I don't know how anybody who goes to medical school can keep up. Because don't they say like after graduation, like an MD, after like 3 weeks out, you're already ops or like you already have to go back and learn.
You already have to
How
study
has
more.
the yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't keep up with it, especially with the advent. Hopefully AI helps at some point, but that's a whole nother show. But I imagine that with the training and the schooling, how was the formal training? Like, how long was the program? What are the certifications? Did you have to go before a board? How does it weigh up against other like clinical professions?
So that's the part that I actually don't like too much about hypnosis, and that's why I wouldn't actually consider myself a hypnotist anymore. Because at the end of the day, it's one of those things that you can do. I think it's about 50 or 100 hours, and you can hang up a shingle and say I'm a hypnotist. And then you get someone that comes to you that had severe childhood trauma, and you
Yeah.
don't really know how to deal with it, or you've never really had that chance. You know, it's like it's something that can actually be very difficult for certain people to deal with, and that's I feel what has created kind of like a bad name for hypnosis in the world. But for me, like I did 2 main trainings. The one was a month-long residential up in Colorado where I studied a sister science to hypnosis called neurolinguistic programming or NLP. I just loved the place completely, NLP comprehensive. And that just made me a certified NLP practitioner. And then I worked through a place here in Florida actually where it was about an 18-month residential program where it was a hypnosis center where they would teach you things and then they'd send you in to work with people with a video camera. And my boss would actually, like in the middle of a session, call me up and say, try this kind of thing, like actually like give me advice there and then in terms of it and would go over it after the fact to make sure you got everything. It was a really, really powerful program. And the thing I loved about this guy was he brought in a lot of other teachers. So over the course of like 18 months, not only did we learn hypnosis, but we had a lot of extra teachings over and above that that just really built up. And then I've done a lot of other certification work aside from that, but those were the two main big ones. Yeah,
Can't beat on the job training, and you certainly
exactly.
can't beat working in a program where somebody's like very willing to tell you you're screwing this up,
Oh, and
there needs to be, more of that. Now, is there any does it require any continuing education? I mean, I imagine you keep up with the industry anyway.
at the end of the day, it's one of those things that you do want to practice and you do want to basically develop your skills and possibly have someone that you can discuss, kind of like a mentor situation where you can actually grow and experience things. But like, I mean, learning new skills, it's the one thing I'll say that's possibly different between medicine and, for example, hypnosis is to some degree, there's always new things that we're going to be learning. Like, don't get me wrong, but to some degree, the way a person creates an issue, the way a person figures things out inside their mind, you can figure out new things, but it stayed pretty much the same in a very big way. And so we're learning, for example, like what parts of the brain through functional MRIs, specific situations are occurring. Or obviously people are innovating techniques at like a freaking like breakneck pace kind of thing. But like it's at the end of the day, I wouldn't say that there's major innovations going on here in terms of it's in at the end of the day, you're dealing with a person that comes to you with a specific issue, and more often than not, it's some kind of a belief, some kind of an association that they have, some kind of memory that's holding them back. And there may be new techniques around it, but there's pretty much a staple of things that you can do to help that person dissociate away from it and feel better.
So in terms of like the individual person, like what's the sliding scale or what's the spectrum of people that are extremely like can be what's the word I'm looking for, that can be
Hypnotizable?
hypnotizable, yeah. I'm getting there. And then like, so how are there different designations for those different levels, or is it just like you don't know till you sit down with them? Like when does that, how long after sitting with somebody can you figure that out, or is that just something
So,
that
so I'm going to give you an answer that's probably different from any textbook that's out there. But like in my books, it's every single person is hypnotizable. If you went to school and learned something new, hypnosis has occurred. Because at the end of the day, hypnosis at a much broader level is me putting a new thought into your brain and your brain not fighting against it and going, okay, cool, yeah, that makes sense to me. So at the end of the day, if I teach you something new, even in this conversation, hypnosis to some degree is occurring. Now, obviously, there's going to be levels of hypnosis, and so the levels of hypnosis is going to be gradated based upon to what degree you don't question what I say. And so as you first get to know me, if you're very skeptical and I say something and you go, let me fact check you, then hypnosis has not occurred very deeply. If we are in a very deep relationship and you consider me an authority about certain things, and I give you the same kind of information, you just assume it to be true, and hypnosis has occurred very deeply. Does that make sense?
yeah, no, absolutely.
So with that being said, I'd say every single person is hypnotizable. The only difference is the level of rapport and trust that the person has for me. So if a person comes to me and can't be hypnotized at all, I'm not going to call them unhypnotizable. I'm just going to say they're unhypnotizable by me today. It's based upon the level of rapport we had, the level of comfort they had with me, etc., trust, comfort, etc. And so it's one of the key skills I believe that works very well in hypnosis is the concept of being able to develop rapport very quickly and being able to really show a person that you understand what's going on for them. And once you get that, you can really pretty much help anyone to some degree. And then obviously their level of trust as they keep working with you, they tend to say that the person that gets hypnotized by you once and they learn that you're doing all good things, by the time you work with them the third time, they go 5 times deeper because they now know what to expect.
What's the average like session length time? I'm sure that varies by
Yeah.
person, but let's say you have me come in and we were going to focus on one particular thing. What's like at what point does it go on for so long that we're not going to get anywhere, or that we're fatiguing?
So it really depends on what you're dealing with. And like, I mean, so very often, and this is where I kind of like veer away from the word hypnosis and I go more into the coaching aspect of it, is a lot of what I do with people is more conversational hypnosis and actually dealing with them and seeing what beliefs they have and then helping them see a different way around it. Like I said, to me, hypnosis is me giving you an idea and your brain accepting it without questioning it. So that can happen very easily through a conversation. In my books, it actually works even better through a conversation. And so but there are very specific techniques like we discussed. Like, for example, if a person has probably very well known one in hypnosis or NLP is helping a person get rid of a fear or phobia. And the originator of NLP, Richard Bandler, like there's a famous story about him that he went to college to prove to people how good he was, and they said, "Okay, great. So we got however many they're going to say. We got 5 people for you for the for you to work on their phobias, but we've only got an hour-long tape." So Richard Bandler said, "I don't care what you do with the remaining 50 minutes. You know, it's like it's only going to take me 10 minutes to work with all 5 of them, because like it's a specific technique. You take a person through it, and it's done." Kind of thing. So like there are those kinds of things, but usually it really depends on the person and what's going on inside of them and how you can get there. It's my sessions usually it's I like working between 1 and 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours being when I'm going insanely deep for a very specific, very, very deep issue that needs to a lot of conversation before we get there.
I was going to say because at some point at some point you're probably getting so tired you're not going to be effective anyway. I can imagine because it's so
Exactly.
taxing.
Yeah.
Let's say somebody has a fear or some let's just call it a fear to be simple, like a phobia.
Okay.
Once that's worked through the first time, or once you have a breakthrough there, is there a possibility of a relapse, or is this just like cured? I hate to use that word cured, but
Yeah, me
is it
too.
something that has to
But
be continued to be worked on, or is that kind of it? Like, what's your experience there?
so if you really, really fix it properly, and it's something that's called ecology, basically. So it's like I mean, it's like the same idea as ecology and the environment. Like so, if you basically fix the oceans at the detriment of the land, it's not going to be something that lasts very long. So an example is a person comes to you with back pain, and you specifically help the brain focus away from paying attention to what's going on in the back, and you help the muscles relax. Technically, you've gotten rid of the back pain. However, there very often there is something that's called secondary gain, where the person says, "Well, due to back pain, all of a sudden I get extra attention from my wife," or due to back pain, I get extra time away from work. And unless you help them find a better way to get rid to deal with everything that is associated with it, to the point that the brain doesn't need it anymore, they may very well find themselves kind of thinking back upon the back pain and kind of like recreating it for themselves because to them it's actually something that's useful. So a very big part of it is that you want to have the person in total feel like this shift is complete for me. I can see it in the future being completely done and I really don't need it anymore. At that point in time, these changes are extremely, extremely permanent.
That's fascinating. You have to pull the thread because things go back so many different layers. I didn't even think about something like that. Just the again, like I have a bad back, and people cater to me in different aspects, whether it's career-wise or otherwise, and then your brain tries to circle back to it because it remembers the rewards that you used to get, whether good or not, that were associated with having that problem in the first place. So I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I was active. Well, I was in Japan, and I'm not going to get into every detail of everything. We don't have time for all this shit, but someday we can. But I was 3 years into a 4-year enlistment. 9/11 happened, so of course the world went to shit. It wasn't as, and this is all very interesting. I'll try not to get too deep on each one of these points because I could talk about this all
Whatever
day.
you need, man. It's like I'm excited to hear about your life, very much
Yeah.
so.
Well, and just on the note so I got deployed after 9/11 overseas. And so just to put a bookmark in that thought for now, I noticed that like I'm still in touch with because we're fortunate enough with social media and just being able to keep in touch with old friends these days. I know that the guys that I was with in my unit are some of them are and again I claim to know nothing about nothing, so I feel fine. Like I don't ever have dreams, or if I think back on those days, for example, if I think back on those some of the terrible things, I don't have like a reaction to it. I have more anxiety about forgetting to pick up the fucking laundry, or something. And that's not to say that there's not something broken in here, but I do know some guy, like the PTSD crowd
PTSD, of course.
that yeah, there are some that are quite literally some friends of mine that are just almost to the point where their lives are just miserable. And then I'll look back but I also know other guys like me that were in the same unit that we can have these conversations. And at least as I'm saying it now, I don't feel like I could think about terrible things, but I don't get a reaction. Now, does that mean there's not a problem? No, but I
Who
don't.
knows? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't feel, you know what I mean? But I'm open to the idea that there could be something to explore there. I just don't lose sleep over that stuff. But fast forward, so I'll put a pin in that for another day. Fast forward that I was in law enforcement for what, 16 years after that. Some of it was in Fort Lauderdale and in Miami. And there was some unsettling things in that job, of course. It wasn't a pleasant day to day, but I do know that you do, at least on the surface, most people get callous to certain things, or they shove it down and don't think
Yeah.
about it. And then in the private investigative years, when I had the human trafficking nonprofit, so in order to do that job, we had to do a lot of searching the dark web, and we would see all these images and all these things that, fortunately, leading up to those years, leading up to those times, I didn't just come into it like right out of college or something like that. I had some military experience, I had some law enforcement experience, so I was, in a sense, I hate to use this term, but I was hardened a little bit.
Calloused. Yeah.
Like my brain was like, okay, this is really bad, but I've been here before, I can process. So back to my kind of circle back to the question I was going to ask is, when you have to deal with, when you have a patient or you're talking to somebody who has like all these traumatic things, is there a process you follow like after like a really crazy session to kind of reset yourself? Because obviously you probably hear some pretty terrible things that you have to process, you know what I mean?
I can take this in so many different ways, man. Because first and foremost, I obviously I mean, you've dealt with a lot, and there's a part inside of me that just wants to forget about me. Like, let's talk about certain things right now.
Sure.
But just to answer your question first, at the very least, is and this. So let me try to see if I can put them both in one situation for you.
Sure.
So if you look at a video, and I'm very sorry that you had to, but when you looked at a video of something happening to a child, if you associate with, oh my God, that is happening to the child, you straight away go into a place of just disgust or whatever emotion that brings up for you. However, as a law enforcement person that's watching that video, you're in a very different situation that you're sitting there saying, maybe I can help that child. Or maybe you can actually already see other children in your mind that you have helped. And so you're watching that video, and somewhere inside of you, as you watch that video, there's a different connection going on. It's what's going to be called a metastate, that you're thinking about that you're basically saying, I'm going to get that poor person out of that situation. And because of that, what happens is you're no longer in the place of being traumatized by the experience. You're actually in a place of feeling empowered to be able to help that person. That difference is the difference that changes everything for everyone. And so it's, to use it to your example, when you help a person change the situation from this happened to me to I learned so many different things, or that got me to this place, or however that is, and they can actually see it from a higher perspective, they get to a place that they're no longer being pulled into that memory itself, and they're actually seeing it from a place of more openness, more distance from it, literally more distance from it. We'll get into that in maybe a bit later. So when you talk about me, for example, however messed up it is, and when you were talking about PTSD, there was a little part inside of me that wanted to smile, because when someone says that, the first thought that comes to my mind is, I love people with PTSD. And it sounds disgusting to say, but what I mean by that is because I know I can help them. So you tell me about the bad stuff, and I'm like, bring them my way, please, 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 please. I'm like a freaking lion that's starved, looking at a piece of meat, going please put this person in front of me and let me do something good for them. So when I work with a person like that, and I actually feel like I made a difference, I leave that session, regardless what the heck happened in that session, I leave that session ready to high five God. It's like that was, thank you so much for bringing that to me. That's exactly what I needed. And I'm sure that for you, I mean, when you were able to help a child that you saw in the video, I still can't wrap my head around that. When you were able to help a child, I mean, there must have been a part inside of you that felt like you were Superman. And to that human being, you were so much more than Superman. And when you can associate with that, that's a completely different place. So it's back to that idea of going above the situation and seeing it from a different perspective.
So everything you said is 1,000% resonating with me. I've never heard it said out loud, and I've never said it to myself. That when you look at situations like that, you're definitely not helpless. It's definitely empowering. I like, I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but it's true. Whereas like I'm seeing
I
something
can't imagine
terrible.
anything
Yeah.
more empowering, man.
Even if we couldn't help the people that we saw in the images and the videos and things like that, just I guess just feeling that we were out there doing something to prevent it from happening to somebody else was definitely, it helps a lot. And a lot of it probably goes, I could think back now through my law enforcement career, then in the military, that we always had a mission for something, a greater good that we were working for. It would be one thing to see certain things, and it could be anything. It could be somebody witnessing a terrible car crash as a bystander, or being at a terrible car crash as an EMT. And just those two different
Amen.
mindsets of like, I'm so helpless, I'm standing here watching these people scream and everything else, or this is still terrible, but I can help. Those two different things, I think, is what you're describing. That's an awesome way
What a
to,
perfect
yeah,
example. Yeah. It's
yeah, that's
and I'm sure you've heard of the book. I mean it's thrown around so much, and it's one of the best books out there. It's if you have, it's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
sure, yeah,
So you know the basic story, right? Like, I mean, a guy in the frickin' Holocaust can see how certain people die and certain people don't, and the only difference is the meaning that they associate with that experience. One
yeah,
person says, "This is the worst thing that ever happened to me. The Nazis are going to kill me." The other person says, "I have to survive, so I can never let this happen again."
yeah.
That difference of thinking about that situation changes everything inside of you, down to the resources that you have to be able to survive through a situation.
Yeah, it's amazing that the human mind. I'm a big student of philosophy, and is in so much as I have time to do so, and like I'll read anything, even if it's like I actually specifically seek out things that I may think that I may disagree with, because I think that the only way we can really grow is if we learn, or like at least
I love
entertain
that.
ideas from people we may disagree with. But I know along those lines as well, it reminds me of that story from, you remember James Stockdale? He was an admiral, but he was in the Vietnam War, and he was shot down, and with McCain and all them. Like he was
Oh, okay.
in the Hanoi Hilton, and but along those lines, the Viktor Frankl thing of the Holocaust, he said that the people that committed suicide or didn't make it were the ones that like mentally, and again, this is way easier said than done, but he said the only reason I made it is, and I was able to make it 6 years and keep my shit together, was I didn't like have false hopes. He said that the guys that ended up like either killing themselves or just dying of just exhaustion or whatever were the ones that said, okay, Christmas is coming up, we're gonna get released on Christmas, so they put it there, and then when that day passed and they hadn't been released,
It's beliefs and attachments. And I mean, we can
yeah,
weave this together so much in terms of, like, I mean, that's almost like the foundation of Buddhism, right? Like, I
yeah,
mean, the expectations that you have for something are the cause of your suffering. As
yeah.
opposed to just saying life is what it is, you create an expectation, you create a story around it, and you're absolutely stuck.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of my favorite things that is I think about when I see somebody, and I do this all day. Like I'll complain about something that I have no control over. But if people spend, I forget, it's not really a quote, but it's the line of people spend a lot of time getting angry at the way and railing against what they want the world to be, when it's, that's just not the world. Like there's all these injustices and things that, we could complain about all day. But really, you just have to learn to at least let go in some way. Listen to me saying this now, and I'll be mad later about something that happens. But yeah, you got the reframing is everything. What are your thoughts on like using psychedelics and all that? Is that part of your like process?
So I definitely do the psychedelics with people. I specifically do it in Jamaica where it's completely legal. To me, it's back to that same thing of, like we said, like, I mean, what makes hypnosis so powerful is when you can get the person to that point that they can take in a new thought without really criticizing it, judging it, or in any way thinking differently about it. And the beauty of psychedelics is it basically breaks away all your old patterns of thinking. So if I have a person in a psychedelic state, and I can actually, in that moment, convince them of something new and have them implant that thought in their mind, it can be the deepest level of hypnosis that you can ever create for a person. And you just see the changes that occur for a person are just things that, like, it's like I've said to a lot of my friends, it's like, to me, psychedelics are to hypnosis what like college is to like middle school. It's just because at that point, especially when you mix them together and you throw in the actual affirmations while the person is in that psychedelic state, or you actually in that psychedelic state talk to the person and you guide them through dealing with something that they weren't able to before. And you may have heard the description before where it's basically like it's the way we work every single day. And you say, like, you get stuck in bad thought patterns or getting upset with something or whatever it is. It's the way that it's kind of described is that it's kind of like that you're at a ski resort and enough people have skied on the snow that it kind of like got compact, and like there's those ridges exactly of where the skis have gone, and when you try ski off of them, your ski gets pulled back into the ridges. And the best description I've ever heard of psychedelics is it's like fresh powder being put down and there's no ridges anymore. So all of
Yeah.
a sudden a person can ski wherever the heck they want. And there's nothing pulling them back to the old thought patterns. So that's what I love about it, is the fact that like you get rid of the conditioning and you can actually take a person to a brand new way of thinking that they weren't able to before. So taking it back to, for example, the PTSD situation, if a person, every single time you talk to them about something that happened to them, the ridge is so deeply cut that they just go straight back into that memory and they can't pull away from it. Very often what you can do is you can give them psychedelics, and then under psychedelics you help them actually get that higher perspective. It's one of my favorite ones, and it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. It's one that I really love, is taking it from a spiritual perspective and just basically allowing them to see it from the point of view of whatever happened to that person isn't suffering anymore, or something along those lines. That on on a basis of like every single day, if a person is military and possibly atheist, they'd just be like, leave me the hell alone. When a person is under the influence of psychedelics and they're in that place that they actually do feel that there's something bigger than them, and you can use that to think about the experience, the shift you experience. It's like, I mean, it's something that therapists just aren't able to do without them.
Sam Harris talks about this a lot, where he's atheist and everything else. And I tend to fall a little bit more on that side, but not in the sense that I'm against, because I just haven't seen enough proof for myself that there's a God up there. But hey, I love the idea. You know what I mean? Like, I'm cool with it. I've been to church. I've done, a lot of religious things over the years. I'm just like more on the other side of it. But I like what Sam says. He's like, I fucking never would have gotten into meditation if it wasn't for psychedelics. He's like, it was like an accelerator, like you were saying. It kind of takes you to that next level, and it probably helps you skip a few steps too, because you could meditate. You go to silent retreat for 3 months and maybe get there, when what psychedelics can do in one afternoon. What are the mechanics of that? So I know, like, you have the setting in Jamaica and everything. You got it all set up there. How long is that? Is it just like a one session? Like, in a nutshell, like, how does that whole program work?
So I like to actually do 4 sessions with a person, and just to put things in perspective, it's like, so as you know, like a recreational dose, and I hate that word recreational because I never ever look at mushrooms as something recreational, but a recreational dose of psilocybin is about 3 grams or so, 2.5 to 3.5 grams. I tend to work with people at a dose of about starting at about 7 grams, usually actually much higher, and I do 4 sessions in a row. I Whether it's going to be 4 days in a row or whether it will be like 2 days of break and 2 days or something like that, but it will be 4 sessions in a row over the course of a week. And what I discovered that does is, when you do a high dose, and obviously you want a person to somehow get used to it first, you're not necessarily going to be like, oh, you never took psychedelics before, here's 10 grams, have fun,
Yeah,
enjoy your
yeah,
trip.
yeah, yeah.
But it's what I discover is when I actually do the higher dose with people and you get them to that place, I leave them alone for the first 45 minutes or so just to go into that place. And then after about that first hour, I come in, and for the remaining like 4 hours, I'm with them most of the time, actually taking them through what's going on for them. So, like, what are you feeling? What's causing it? Let's go into it. And I have them actually really, really examine what it is that's going on inside of them at the deepest level. And as you know, like, it's a pretty common thing with most psychedelic things that they do something like over the course of 3 days, where they say day one is you're going to experience it, day two it breaks you down, and then day three you're finally ready for it. I kind of discovered the same thing over the course of 4 sessions, where the first time that I do it, the person still has their strength and they look at something and they kind of like still manage to push it away. And then when you give them a bit of a higher dose the next time, and they get back to the same thing because something's knocking at their door and it won't stop knocking, you can usually get rid of it by the second session, but definitely by the fourth session, you have dealt with it at such a deep level and you've dealt with everything else around it, because that's what psychedelics do. The moment you experience something, everything related to it brings you into that spiral. And so you start being pulled into the spiral of thought, and everything else that comes up, when we start working through it and they start feeling safer in that realm, they can go deeper. And then they start feeling safer in that realm and you go deeper until you get down to the real core issue, that they'll go like, holy shit, I never thought about this. And now it feels so completely different. So my ideal way of working with people is basically 4 sessions over the course of a week. Stated in a very long way, but that's a
Yeah.
bit of an explanation to get there.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize the sessions could be that long. So, so you now, I'm assuming that they're set up in a nice room and everything like that. Are we?
Exactly.
Is this a blindfolded exercise, or how's the setting look?
So laying in a bed, very comfortable, with a trip sitter, obviously same sex trip sitter if they need it for any reason whatsoever. But I'm there the whole time, and then so you start off with a blindfold and what you call it, not earbud, things in your
Uh,
ears.
like plugs, just a noise
Earplugs.
plug. I don't know
Earplugs,
why I can't think
exactly.
of it either. Yeah.
Okay, so blindfold and earplugs. And for the first 45 minutes, just to let the person go deep into it and let the psychedelic experience begin. After that, it's really based upon what's necessary. A lot of it will be open eye, we're talking. We're talking just like this. And then as we get to something and they actually hit some kind of realization, I'll say, perfect, put your blindfold on, listen to these affirmations. And I've got a bunch of different affirmations, and I'll leave them alone for the next 30, 45 minutes, obviously peeking in on them, but leave them to their own place. And then I'll go back in and I'll be like, how are you doing right now? How are you feeling? What's going on now? And then we'll do the next step, and it'll be another 30 minutes of working with them. They hit another revelation. I'll say, perfect. Put on the blindfold, let it integrate. I'll be back in 20 minutes, whatever it is. And we just keep working through it.
Yeah,
And just working in that way, you're really, really just breaking, you're taking off. Like you're basically like a sculptor, just basically taking off the small extra little bits.
my next question was going to be how do you do this for 4 hours? But it sounds like you're able to kind of step back and recharge a little bit in between
Yeah.
while they're
And
doing it.
and this is something I really have to do one on one because it's like, I mean, I couldn't imagine dealing with even two people at the same time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's basically while that person's in there for half an hour, I'm making myself a cup of coffee and I'm checking my messages quickly, whatever it is. And then it's I get myself back into place and go back in there. And then obviously in the evening, like once everything is calmed down, then we'll talk about it. We'll do some integration work and get them ready for the next day. The next day we'll start off with a conversation and then psychedelics start again and we go all over again. Like obviously this is the deepest form of work I do, but it's obviously also the most powerful.
Yeah, the opioid epidemic, and I saw some recent work where they're using it to treat. He was the original Wolf of Wall Street. You know, that guy was got addicted to Vicodin. Actually, of all the drugs he's done in his life, he got addicted to
Right.
Vicodin. Yeah, because he was doing like Quaaludes and Coke and everything else. So it was the Vicodin that got him, and he was. I just saw a clip of him recently. He went to get a treatment similar to what you're describing, and like because he was going back for I forget the generic. Oxy that they hand out to the
Okay.
methadone or whatever it is. Yeah, and he said he has great. Doesn't even. Not only is he not doing those things anymore, but he has no desire to. So it was, it's remarkable. And probably the last thing that for just for this particular talk that I really am fascinated about with not just the hypnosis part, but then the psychedelics is the end of life component to it because I just think that's so powerful, and I'm so glad that this is being studied now and projects are being funded, and we're being able to bring it back into the mainstream, even though it's not legal in the states yet in most
Yeah.
places. But just the stories you hear of people that have do some form of psychedelic treatment when they're terminally ill or near the end. And I really hope that we get to the point where we can have that as like a standard thing. Like if, as now we can't all
Completely
predict our
agree.
deaths, but now as far as like the hypnotic or the hypnosis component, have you worked with anybody that was terminally ill? Or are those things you can
Oh yeah.
discuss? Or like was there a benefit, do you think, there also?
It's I think at the end of the day, I mean, it taking away the concept of hypnosis to do something like release a phobia or anything else. I mean, hypnosis is just helping a person get to the place that their brain is just calm and able to process things more comfortably. And when you can do something like a person that's terminally ill and you can just get them to the point that they can, instead of be stuck in the anxiety of like, oh God, this is happening to me and the doctors are pricking me and there's more nurses coming in, everything else. And you get them to that place of actually finding a state of peace. And then from that state of peace, considering what's happening to them, they can actually just get, it's back to the same thing. And it boils down to everything I do is just developing that different perspective. And so in this case, it's just creating that sense of like a higher perspective, a sense of like everything's going to be okay. I don't need to complete everything. My family's going to be okay without me, or whatever happens to me, it's going to be peaceful. how whatever they need in their mind, that reframing, it's very, very powerful. And hypnosis is extremely, extremely good at that. Extremely powerful. I mean, psychedelics to me, like I said, it's back to that concept of university versus middle school, but it really, like, I mean, hypnosis to just help a person be able to create that new mindset is extremely, extremely powerful. And the one that really gets to me, because I just think it's so powerful, but it's completely illegal to my belief everywhere, is MDMA,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
where there's just such an element of empathy and comfort that's created for a person when they take MDMA, especially when it comes to something like PTSD, end of life, or anything like that, that they can just see things from a place of peace and comfort. And that's my aim with hypnosis. It's just like you said, like the beauty of psychedelics for meditation, same kind of thing here. MDMA just kind of forces that state upon the person, and then instead of just allowing it to be a trip for the person, to actually guide a person within that state and make sure that it's not something that they experience for a moment, but something that they can think about after the session is over, is the big part. Something that they actually make the shift inside their brain so it can never be the same for them again.
Yeah, I really hope. I mean, for all the reasons that we've talked about here and that we'll get into in the future, that a lot of these things can be implemented more, and with all the stuff we have, pharmaceutical industries and all the things we could talk about all day that anger us. We seem to have within us, or the capacity with the proper training and guidance, to not solve everything, but make some serious ground and long lasting issues, and not having people put on, 8 different types of medications, one to wake them up and help them focus, and one to put them to sleep. The space seems to be making some ground, and I hope it continues in that direction. So I guess the only thing I would say to kind of wrap up just the convo before I end the recording here is, it sounds like, I mean, I'm getting energy off of just listening to you. You must just be happy, in so much as, look, we're all human beings, right? But it sounds like the stuff you get to do for people, you must have just such a sense of like job satisfaction, or just your mission in life. Just that great feeling. Barring all the other crazy shit that's going on in the world, there are so many people out there that are in positions of roles and things that, they just do things because they have to earn money. And I can't imagine just the feeling that you get, just, day after day, being able to help people. And again, this isn't really a question. I just wanted to throw it out there because it feels amazing to me. And I'm 1,000 miles from you right now on a computer screen.
There is something just so freaking beautiful about the fact that a person comes to you with a problem and they leave you without it. Like, it's
Yeah.
to take it back to your comment about like the sex trafficking or the PTSD. Like, it's just there's nothing more gratifying in the world than actually seeing someone and not necessarily taking like the credit of saying I'm the healer, but saying I was able to help them in the journey in a way that they weren't able to find without me. And just it's like it can seriously, like, no jokes, bring me to tears this very second in terms of gratitude that I have for having this wonderful gift put into my life.